Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Module 2, Lesson 4 of the American West. So, we are coming close to finishing our time with our book, The Buffalo Are Back. So, we are going to go ahead and skip to our pizza bite question today, which is what is the main lesson of The Buffalo Are Back? So, we are trying to think what can we learn? What can we take away to keep in our hearts and our minds about this book? What can we tell people about this book? How can we make a difference after reading this book? Yesterday, you guys saw these pictures of things that related to the book, right? So buffalo was an important feature in our book. The American government that impacted the prairie and the buffalo. The American Indians, they impacted the buffalo and the prairie. The prairie, that is where our book takes place. That is what we are talking about with the American West, the prairie. We talked about early American settlers and how they impacted the prairie and the buffalo. And we talked about President Roosevelt as well and how he impacted the buffalo and the prairie. So I've said the word impact a bunch of times. What does the word impact mean? If I am impacting something, what am I doing? Think back to when we talked about the seasons and how the seasons impact nature and people. What did the seasons do to nature and people every year? They cause changes, right? So with impact in this book, what does impact mean with this book? Tell me in the puzzle, what do you think impact means? If the settlers impacted the buffalo in a negative way, what does that mean? So when we talk about impact, that means we talk about things that caused changes. So how did the settlers in the government cause changes to the prairie? Okay, so when we are talking about the main lesson of this book, we learned that the American Indians, they took care of the prairie by setting fire to the grasses to help put nutrients back in the soil. That was a good way that the Native Americans impacted the prairie. That was a way that they made changes to the prairie for a good reason. How did people impact the prairie in a bad way? What kind of changes were made to the prairie in a bad way? Tell me in the puzzle, what is something you have learned that was an impact to the prairie or buffalo that was bad? All right, so I can't wait to see what your responses are. I know you guys have built so much knowledge through reading this book, and I know that this book is teaching you some new things that you never knew before. But it is important to remember, guys, that this is our history. This is America's history. We have experienced some negative things and positive things, but the important thing to remember is that we can make changes. We can make good impacts. So we're still looking at these pictures. And so I want you to look at these pictures, okay, and listen to what I'm asking you. In the Ed puzzle, I want you to tell me who had a negative impact on the prairie and buffalo. So what I mean is who harmed or hurt the prairie and the buffalo. Tell me in the Ed puzzle. The settlers and government. So those two groups brought harm to the prairie, right? So the government first brought harm to the prairie because what did they break with the American Indians? They broke their treaties. They broke their promises. And so what did the settlers do? Once the Indian War started, what did all the settlers do? They were told to kill all the buffalo. And so that hurt the prairie. With the buffalo gone and the settlers taking over that land, the American Indians couldn't take care of the grasses and they didn't have buffalo to provide them a home. So the settlers and the government had a negative impact on the prairie, right? So once the settlers took over the Native Americans' land, they started farming. And in the Ed Puzzle, tell me what happened when the settlers started farming on the land? What happened to the land? It dried up. The crops didn't work because they didn't have the buffalo to use their hooves to dig into that soil. So their crops died. They didn't have food, and so they had to leave the land. Now, later in time, we met a new person in our book that was an American settler, and he was someone who was in the prairie for a long time. So I want you to tell me in the Ed Puzzle who had a positive impact on the prairie, who helped make and keep the prairie healthy. Tell me in the Ed Puzzle. The American Indians, a long time ago, they had a positive impact because they kept the prairie healthy by burning that grass. They kept the prairie healthy by taking care of those grasses, which helped the buffalo, and the buffalo helped the American Indians. Later in time, after the Indian Wars and after the Native Americans had to move off their land, the government realized that it made mistakes. So President Roosevelt wanted to save that land. He wanted to save the prairie, and he wanted to bring buffalo back on to the prairie lands. So think about, what did he do to make sure the buffalo would stay safe in the prairie? What did he do? Tell me in the puzzle. He made it to where people could not hurt or kill the buffalo. He also had government workers help farmers in the prairie by teaching them to plant crops and to farm in curves instead of straight lines. So, as we are thinking about our book, we're going to think about how changes happened from long ago in the prairie and changes that happen over time to what it looks like now. So as you're starting to think, there were both positive influences and negative influences on the prairie. Now we're going to listen to our poem again, Buffalo Dusk, and I want you to think about what this poem teaches us about the settlers' impact on the buffalo.
Buffalo Dusk. The buffaloes are gone, and those who saw the buffaloes are gone. Those who saw the buffaloes by thousands, and how they pawed the prairie sod into dust with their hoofs, their great heads down, pawing on in a great pageant of dusk. Those who saw the buffaloes are gone, and the buffaloes are gone.
Okay, so yesterday we talked about how we heard in the beginning and the end of the poem that the buffaloes are gone. Why were the buffaloes gone? And why were those who saw the buffaloes are gone? Tell me in the puzzle, why were the buffaloes gone? The buffalo were gone because the early American settlers killed them during the Indian Wars. And so, who were the people that saw the buffaloes that are gone? The Native Americans. And they lost their source of food, shelter, and clothing. The buffalo helped them, and they helped the buffalo too. So, the settlers, did they have a positive or a negative impact on buffalo? They had a negative impact on buffalo. They brought harm to the buffalo. But over time, what did some of the Americans that came from families that were settlers? So when you think about your history, you have grandparents, you have great-grandparents, you have aunts and uncles. So these American settlers stayed on the land. And over time, those settlers had children that grew up in the West. How did those grandchildren and those children change for the good? Their family in the past, they had a negative impact. But over time, what did they try to do? They tried to make a positive impact. So when we are thinking about the people's impact on the prairie, we can think of how we would write our informative paragraph, right? With our informative paragraph, we'll have a topic statement that answers our question. We'll have our juicy details that gives us more information in our conclusion. And our juicy details, remember we talked about what we learned at the beginning, the middle, and the end. We use those sequence words first, then, and finally to tell us what happened in order. So looking at the people's impact on the prairie, first, the American Indians burned the grasses to keep the soil healthy, which kept the buffalo healthy. So that happened a long time ago. Then the settlers, so look at these topic specific words. First, the American Indians, that's topic specific. That's talking about who impacted the prairie. Then settlers, that's another topic specific word. They shot buffalo, which meant no hooves for healthy soil. They brought cattle that ate all the grass. They tore out the grass to plant crops, and they caused the soil to dry up and caused dust clouds. So first, the American Indians had a positive impact. Then the settlers had a negative impact on the prairie. Finally, so at the end of our book, we learned that President Roosevelt and the government made buffalo reserves. They taught farmers, they planted trees, and they made the soil healthy again, which caused the crops to grow and for the buffalo to live on that land. So, what is something that we can learn about this story from saving the prairie and the buffalo? What do you think we can learn? How can we keep this in our hearts? We don't live on the prairie, but what can we do? What can we do here in Tennessee with our land and our nature? Tell me in the puzzle. We can protect our land. We can make safe choices when we are in nature. A few years ago, we had some fires in the Smoky Mountains, and it was really scary. So we can be safe with our nature. We don't need to cause fires. We don't need to destroy lands. When we are in nature, we have to leave it how it is. We need to take care of our environment, right? We need to take care of our environment. We need to take care of the animals that are in this environment. So how could you teach this to your family? How could you teach this? What could you tell your grown-ups or your family about this book? What is a lesson you learned from this book? Tell me in the puzzle. All right. A lesson I learned is that people make mistakes, and sometimes, not all the time, people try to fix those mistakes by making good impacts. So we can have a negative impact and a positive impact in everything we do. You have a positive and a negative impact in everything you do too. Sometimes we cause bad things to happen, and it's our choice to fix those problems that we made. So as we are thinking about the lessons that we have learned from this book, we are going to put those thoughts into paper. We are going to make an informative paragraph explaining how people had a positive and a negative impact on the prairie. So remember, when we are writing, we will have that topic statement, which tells the main idea. we will have our evidence, and we will put the evidence in order of when it happened. So we'll start with first, we'll talk about the Native Americans. Then we'll talk about the settlers. And finally, we will talk about President Roosevelt. Remember to use those topic-specific words. I can't use the word people or he or him for those sentences because I have to tell who exactly I am talking about. And then we will finish with a conclusion, and that reinforces, so that restates what we said in the topic statement. So remember, we talked about how the Americans impacted the prairie first, then the settlers impacted negatively, and President Roosevelt had that final positive impact that helped keep the prairie healthy and safe again. So when we are writing, we are going to use topic-specific words because it helps our reader know exactly what we are telling them. It helps them figure out what the main idea is. So we will use words prairie, buffalo, American Indians, settlers and farmers, and President Roosevelt in our writing. And we will be writing tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. All right. And again, when we are writing, we need to make sure that we use topic-specific words and we use vocabulary that matches with those topic-specific words. So remember the other day we talked about how buffalo moved, and we talked about the word tough. So in this little puzzle, this little cutout puzzle, I want you to find 2 words in this puzzle, and I want you to use them in a sentence. I wouldn't use words like the hunters use their hooves to make good soil, right? I could say the buffalo's hooves made the soil rich and wet. I could say the American Indians protected the buffalo by keeping the grasses healthy. I could also say the government brought drought to the land after the Indian Wars. So in the Ed puzzle, I want you to tell me a topic-specific word and a vocabulary word that we could use in a sentence. All right, Smarties, as always, keep that growth mindset. Good learners do hard things, and I will see you guys tomorrow with a final lesson with the buffalo are back. Bye, guys, and happy learning.